What's up, everyone? It's Joni. So earlier today, or probably yesterday by the time you see this video for the first of you, Apple finally announced the first Macs to feature the M1 processor, which is part of their Apple silicone chips that they're now replacing all the Intel Macs with. They have the new MacBook Air, Mac Mini, and 13-inch MacBook Pro. So according to Apple, these machines are all faster than their previous Intel counterparts. They're also faster than comparable Windows computers that are in the same price range. And they're priced either the same as they were previously or slightly less. I believe the Mac Mini is $100 less than it was before. Now, it's rare for us to see Apple actually giving us more performance and keeping the same price or lowering it. But it has been seen before, like when they released the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Now, I'm really eager to see how the new M1 chips actually are in practical use. But part of me was also a little relieved that they haven't replaced the 16-inch MacBook Pro so that the Intel version is still relevant today. They seem to be starting with the smaller laptops and working their way up. Now, and I'm not one to be just taking Apple's word for it that they're faster and can sustain a full load, but I am curious to see how it works, if it works as well as how we've seen the ARM processors on the iPhone and the iPad. But in this video, we're not talking about the ARM-based Macs with the new M1 chips. Today, we're doing the follow-up to my initial video when I unboxed my 16-inch MacBook Pro. In the original video, I titled it Why I Purchased the 16-inch MacBook Pro Before Apple Silicone was released. So I purchased this machine back in July, and that video came out July 29th. So about a week before that was when I got my computer. And I told you guys that after I used it for a couple months, I would tell you what my experience using my MacBook Pro would be like. Well, it's been about approximately 3 months, and I've gotten acclimated to using it as my main desktop. I don't go back to my 15-inch from 2013 anymore. And just to review, the specs were, it's a 2019 16-inch. I mistakenly referred to it as a 2020 because the graphics card that's equipped on it came out earlier that month, but it's a 2019 16-inch, 2.3 gigahertz, 8-core Intel Core i9 with 32 gigabytes of RAM. I didn't go for the 64 because I read that it doesn't really improve render time when I'm rendering video. 32 is sufficient, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And the thing that I really spent on this laptop was the fact that I maxed out the graphics. It's using the AMD Radeon Pro 5600M with 8 gigabyte cache. Now, this video is specifically from my perspective as a content creator, as a music producer, and occasionally I might use this laptop to test out DJ software with DJ gear. So if you're looking to find out if this is a laptop that you're going to be taking to school or using for work or using for basic office computing, this might not be the video for you because that's honestly something that I'm not familiar with, and I think it's a topic that's covered really well by other reviewers. So before I tell you about my experience with my MacBook Pro, a word from our sponsor, Direct Music Service. DMS is an online database for working DJs and mix artists. It's the one-stop shop where you can get your music from for your gigs. It's a searchable, organized database with thousands of edits, remixes, and different versions of your favorite tracks from many different genres. You can now save some money and get a discount using one of these 2 coupon codes. Use the code PJMonthly and get 30% off your first month off any monthly subscription. Use the coupon code PJYearly and get 10% off your entire first year of any yearly subscription. Go to directmusicservice.com today to sign up. All right, so previously, before this computer, my main laptop was a 15-inch MacBook Pro from late 2013. It had the dual graphics, the NVIDIA card with the integrated graphics, which is the Intel. It was a quad-core i7, and I used it from May of 2014 all the way until July. Well, I won't even say I used it up to July, but it was my main computer up to July this year. and I still use that computer. It's basically my main machine for DJ software. So what's the key differences? Well, I can tell you right now, my render times when I edit on Premiere and I decide to render a video, especially if I have a lot of layers, what used to take anywhere between 4 to 5 hours, which long lessons with multiple cameras, it can take a long time, especially when I'm doing crops, will take 2 to 3 hours on this laptop. I also noticed that when the computer fan does go on and the computer starts to get hot, it doesn't get laggy. It doesn't feel like I'm losing performance. In my previous computer, if I let the laptop run too hot for too long, I start seeing drop frames on my preview screen in Premiere. On this computer, it seems to take the beating. Now, whenever you're editing, the fan does start to go on, but it seems to handle fine for the type of work that I do. Now, I'm not editing 4K video or anything like that. I'm editing clips that are 1080p. But I'm really happy choosing the AMD Radeon Pro. And the reason why I went for that beast of a video card is because I saw the benchmarks on them from other reviewers and how much of a difference they made with other video cards, the other available video cards for this computer with the same amount of cache. So for video editing, this thing is a win. Now, the thing that I noticed about doing any editing, whether it's video or photo, is that the Retina display on this is tuned a little differently. I haven't quite figured out if it's just the factory color profile that's on the integrated graphics, or if it's something that has to do with the Retina display. But the colors on this computer, aside from the display being brighter, the colors are a lot more saturated. So whenever I'm editing video and I'm used to my 15-inch and I set it to the equilibrium point where my eyes are used to, because the display is so much more saturated, my video ends up being a little less saturated because I'm not pushing it as much as I think I should, like I did on my last laptop. Now, maybe we can say that old 2013 15-inch might be a little duller looking on its color profile, but it seems that whatever I make on this laptop, especially when I forget to lower the brightness, always appears darker on other devices and appears to be less saturated. I did notice, however, that when I'm using Photoshop, the color profile of my preview screen seems to be a lot flatter, but then when I render and I preview it, it's a lot more saturated. Now, I took both machines, sat them side to side, and you can clearly tell that the 16-inch is a lot more vibrant looking versus the 15-inch. But I really prefer how the old Retina display looked. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the brightness and I like the size and the resolution of the screen. I just wish that it was a little less saturated. But whenever I would take the color profiles and put the exact same ones to both machines, the 16-inch MacBook Pro still looked a lot more vibrant. I wish I could just take the global saturation of the display for everything and just take it down by 10 to 15%. That would be perfect for me. But that's the only thing about the Retina display that I would say is my complaint. The larger resolution lets me have a desktop setting where I can fit more things around. I can have my icons smaller and the text isn't hard to read, so it doesn't strain my eyes. Now, music-wise, music production, I use Ableton Live as my DAW. I've never been one to really overload on plugins where I have so much effects or soft synths that I start having too much that I have to move my buffer up. So all in all, I don't notice a difference in my workflow, except my render times when I'm rendering out a track are a lot faster. I took a project that was identical on my 15-inch and my 16-inch, and I would say I get a 20% increase in render time using the 16-inch MacBook Pro. One of the cool things that I did notice about the 16-inch MacBook Pro is when you're using it in Ableton Live, the internal sound card and the headphone jack appear separately on the list of audio devices. In fact, when you're using Ableton, I have to manually select the headphones. It doesn't just automatically switch over when I plug the headphones in. That's not the case for every application. If you're on your browser, if you plug in the headphones, it automatically goes to your headphones or your AirPods. But when I'm using Ableton, I have to manually choose the headphones. I think it's great that the headphone output registers on the computer as a separate audio device versus the internal sound card. Now, speaking of the sound card, the sound from the speakers is surprisingly bassy. People would hear it and say, wow, that sounds really, really good. It's insanely bassy for how small it is. And mind you, I came from the 2011 MacBook Pro, which had okay speakers. And then I got to the 2013 Retina Display MacBook Pro that had a little bit bassier speakers, just a tiny amount, but it sounded great, sounded a little bit more full. And then you go to this, and it's almost like there's a mini subwoofer in there. Now, how do I feel about it? It's great for listening to music, but I do find that when you're listening to just dialogue, and when somebody's using a microphone and they have that proximity effect of their voice being deep, like maybe like how I sound right now, because of the attenuated lower frequencies, I tend to need the volume louder on the speakers. Because of that, I feel like it's almost like in order for me to hear dialogue, I have to have it louder. Or maybe it's louder because the normal volume I would need to hear it at has more low end on it. And I know this seems to be a first world problem that I'm complaining about, but I do wish there was a global EQ on the audio settings where I can just cut the bass off just for dialogue, because sometimes I rarely listen to music myself, and I love to listen to a lot of interviews, podcasts, and talk shows. Having laptop speakers that hit that bottom end make dialogue a little harder to hear. It's great for music. I even enjoy writing music with my PC speakers versus having it on the studio monitors. But I just wish that globally, when I'm just watching a YouTube video on my laptop, I could roll that off. Now, we talked about this in my last video. I don't find myself using the touch bar very much, aside from what I used the function keys before. I just use it for volume. I use it to control my brightness. And that's pretty much it. I don't use any application-specific functions on the touch bar. Maybe I'll learn to use it later, but in these last 3 months, I haven't quite really even looked that way. I'll tell you something that does get annoying is whenever I hit my plus key or my delete key, I always accidentally touch Siri. And I always know when I hit Siri because if you're video editing and the fan is going pretty fast, you just hear that fan shut down because it has to lower the fan noise in order for Siri to hear you. I thought I would use Siri on this laptop, but it seems that I don't really need it. I do love the scissor switch keyboard on this. It feels a lot more stable when you're typing compared to the Retina models from 2013 to 2016. Actually, it's 2012 to 2016. We all know that the models from 2016 to 2019 were very troublesome with some of the keys getting stuck. It's very loud. I like these over the last time they had an iteration of this type of keyboard because it seems to be more stable. They don't wobble. When I have it next to my 15-inch, I don't know if it's just because I've been using it for so long, but it feels like there's a lot more give on the keys. And this seems to be more stable. Maybe because it's a lot newer, but I remember other reviewers pointing out that it seems to have a more even actuator where wherever you touch it on the key, the whole key goes down instead of being pushed from whatever side of the key you're on. Now, what else do I use this computer for? Well, if I use it for video editing and I use it for content creation, then it should be more than enough. In fact, it's a little bit overkill for using with DJ software. Now, I never bought this laptop to take to the club. You never know who's carrying a beer at the wrong time or when somebody decides to make it rain from the VIP booth from above. But I have used it here in the studio, testing it out with DJ gear, especially when I'm testing out DJ gear and DJ software on Mac OS Catalina. What's awesome, because of the power of this laptop, I can take my buffer settings and take them down to 1 milliseconds or setting number 1 on whatever software I'm using, whether it's Rekordbox, Serato, or Traktor. I can even use DJ software in extreme performance settings with using the same laptop, live streaming in the background, taking in capture cards and having OBS back there. I typically don't do that. I usually allocate them to 2 laptops, but we'll talk about live streaming in a bit. One of the things in DJ software that I do on my MacBook Pro is the fact that I use multiple DJ software, and I like to take my Serato crates, which Serato is my primary software, and I use Record Buddy to create a Rekordbox XML so that I can transfer my crates from Serato and create playlists, identical playlists inside Rekordbox. Well, the whole process of taking your crates and converting them to Rekordbox XML, that takes about 20 to 30 minutes. And then once you have your Rekordbox XML playlist, you still have to transfer it into your main playlist in Rekordbox if you want to be able to use it efficiently with search. That step takes my 15-inch MacBook Pro about 5 hours. On the 16-inch MacBook Pro, it takes about 2 hours. Now, other things. I thought I was going to get annoyed by this big trackpad. I am so used to it and I love it. The reason why I thought I would get annoyed was because my palms would touch it, and because it's where your palm is. I don't even notice that it's there because it's made so that it doesn't register any accidental touching because it's so big. One thing that took me a little bit to get used to was the haptic feedback. It feels like a click, but then it doesn't feel like a click. It doesn't feel exactly like a click. But then it became really apparent to me the advantage of the haptic feedback. The old trackpad that had an actual click had a more effective click on the bottom and a less effective click on the top because it would move like that. The haptic feedback is even wherever you are on the trackpad. So once I got past the fact that it did feel a little different, the haptic feedback made more sense to me. And I now don't notice, I don't think about that it is a little different. Because in the beginning, when it does feel a little different for you, you'll have I had this habit where I'm kind of pushing a little harder, and I noticed I did it a lot until my hand hurt, only because I wasn't trusting that it was getting my input. But now I use the trackpad no different from how I used my old one, only I honestly don't think it was necessary to have it this big, but it doesn't get in my way. There's no reasons why I would prefer it smaller, but I don't see myself using the entirety of the trackpad. In fact, I have my mouse more sensitive, set a little bit more sensitive. But as long as it doesn't get in my way, I like it the way it is. Now, let's talk about live streaming. One of the things that I did before with live streaming, and I still do every now and then, was I was using my 13-inch MacBook Air as my live streaming device, as my computer that would take in the capture cards or capture card during the time. And I would stream at 720p. I would create my graphics. I would create my scenes. My playback of video graphics, animations would all be done in OBS, coming from a tiny little 13-inch MacBook Air. And yeah, it struggled a little bit. It didn't so much struggle with the cameras, but it struggled with transitions. At one point, I had to do live interviews for product releases. And I knew that that 13-inch MacBook Air wasn't going to fly with what I was trying to do. I had to create a scene where you could see my Serato screen from the other computer, see my face from the webcam, and see my overhead camera where it was showing the DJ setup. Well, one thing to know about a Mac is that in OBS, it doesn't access your dedicated graphics card. It's always using your integrated graphics. Well, let me tell you, I was able to do all the same things that I did on 13-inch MacBook Air, but I was able to blow it up to 1080p. I had 2 capture cards connected to the computer, and they were different capture cards. Had my MacBook Pro Effects as my audio device because all my audio was running through the Pro Effects. And with multiple scenes with the overhead camera, the front webcam, the overlay with logos, some PNG, some JPEG, and also with the crop capture of the Serato computer, the 16-inch took it without a hiccup. And mind you, I'm using these through Zoom, StreamYard, or Teams using OBS's virtual cam, where I can take the OBS output and use it as my video device when I'm in Zoom, Teams, or StreamYard. And it not only showed my custom scene, it could transition to another scene effortlessly. It just went scene to scene to scene with no issues. With this MacBook Pro, I actually have upped my OBS bandwidth output from 8,000 to 10,000, and I've been able to achieve a more crisp look with 30 frames per second using the 16-inch MacBook Pro as my OBS streaming device. In fact, in my ideal setup, I like to use my 15-inch MacBook Pro with Serato and using the 16-inch as my streaming laptop. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you should be using this laptop for. I'm sure you can find a good gaming PC for about half the price that could probably do more for OBS. But I'm just saying that having the laptop, and I'm using it for video editing, and when I need a laptop that can live stream, this pulls through for me, despite a Mac not being the best thing to use for OBS. Other things about the laptop, we mentioned that, yeah, you will need dongles for everything. Here's one thing I thought I would be annoyed by. The power supply, I always loved MagSafe, but on these new Macs, ever since the ones in 2016 came out with USB Type-C, the power is USB Type-C. And I thought I was going to miss the MagSafe because I was scared that I was going to scratch the side of my MacBook or accidentally snag the wire, maybe even fray it or break it. And I actually went and bought a MagSafe type USB Type-C wire that can come on and off on here. And it doesn't really stay on very well. If you get the bigger one, it will stay on, but it covers the other port a little bit and you can't use the other port. So I kind of just said, okay, fine, I'll just use how it's made to be used, which is using the USB Type-C wire. While I still think it's a safety issue that you can accidentally snag it, and I do keep the fake MagSafe around, there is something smarter about this power brick and this wire. You see, before on my old MacBook power brick, certain parts of the wire are part of the brick. In fact, the part that connects to the computer from the power brick is connected. It doesn't come off the way the USB Type-C one is. So that means everything that could fray, which is essentially this wire, is replaceable. And it's not very expensive to replace. If you fray the MagSafe part of your wire on those old MagSafe power bricks, you have to replace the entire power brick. And it could cost anywhere between $60 to $80. And it depends on the wattage you get, and you have to get a high wattage one for your MacBook Pro. In this system, the only thing that frays here is the part that comes off, which is a USB Type-C cable. The power brick is just a brick. Now, I have this wire here that I had to buy, and I was a little disappointed that it didn't come with the MacBook Pro, but it comes with the 2 prongs for direct connecting because this just comes off. But the point here is the power brick has no parts that will fray, so you'll never have to replace this thing, unless of course it breaks itself, but very unlikely now that it's going to be damage caused by a bad wire. Because of that, I actually learned to not just accept, but love the system of USB Type-C through providing power. So despite the benefits of MagSafe, this thing was actually pretty genius. And a lot of people criticized it, and I was on that boat just reading reviews, but I really learned to like this. And I'll tell you another reason why I like it. So this thing is 96 watts and it's showing on Amazon for $79. I've actually seen it less, maybe down to $59. But what's cool about it is instead of, if you have an old MacBook Pro, say with the MagSafe, you can get one of these and then just get the USB Type-C to MagSafe 2, Mag 2, or maybe even Mag 1, and you'll have a power supply system that won't have the fraying issues of the old MagSafe power bricks. And if you get the one that's 96 watts and you use the MagSafe and you decide later to get a 16-inch MacBook Pro, you now have two power bricks, one extra one that you can have around. I was going to say that this actually came out to be cheaper than buying a MagSafe power brick, a MagSafe 2 power brick. But looking at the price, this with the MagSafe USB Type-C wire does cost a little more. But the peace of mind that the part of it that can fray and damage itself is replaceable, this thing's amazing. Now, the other awesome thing about USB Type-C is you don't necessarily have to use an Apple power supply. Your MacBook Pro can be charged with a power brick that isn't necessarily 96 or 100 watts. It's just that it's slower, and when your computer is computing at a full load, it's actually draining the battery because the charger can't keep up. But if you're just idling, you can charge your MacBook Pro with a lighter power brick that has less wattage. But you don't necessarily have to use an Apple power brick to charge your computer. There's actually smaller ones available. This one's from a company called Aukey, and I'll leave a link down in the pinned comment below where you can get this. This is actually a 100 watt power brick, and the only thing I can say I don't like about it is the fact that I can't add an extension wire because I can't always fit this whole brick plugged to the wall or to the power strip. This doesn't have a way to remove and put an extension on it. Of course, you could always just take an extension cord and plug it there. But this only costs $40 versus this costing $80. Well, we're getting off topic. I've been talking about the power supply. So other things about the laptop. I do notice that the hinge is a bit softer. I don't know if I like it because little movements can actually change its position. My old 15-inch MacBook Pro was more rigid here. Now let's talk about the things that you lose when you go to a MacBook Pro, and it specifically has to do with using macOS Catalina. And I know that Big Sur is going to be coming out soon. Apple is making a claim that the transition from Intel to Apple Silicon is going to be seamless. That means that you should be able to use legacy software on there. But one of the things about macOS Catalina is that they made it so that it no longer supports 32-bit software. So if you have older software, like for you folks who still use Serato Scratch Live, that's been discontinued since 2014, or if you have audio effect or instrument plugins that are 32-bit, it will no longer work on this laptop, specifically because it doesn't work on macOS Catalina. I'm not gonna lie, if you have old plugins that you really, really need, having a new machine might not be the best idea. Not necessarily just a 16-inch MacBook Pro, but anything that starts at macOS Catalina and moving forward. And the thing here that kind of did annoy me about Apple is how they're saying, oh, the transition from Catalina to Big Sur as well as the transition going from Intel to Apple Silicon is going to be smooth. You'll be able to use all your stuff. Well, this is whatever's left over once you get rid of 32-bit. So Apple got rid of support for 32-bit to prep itself and be able to say, we supported everything in the previous platform after it's been purged of all 32-bit support. Now, I understand why they got rid of 32-bit, but there are some of us who are dependent on some of our software and plugins from the 32-bit side. I kept my old machine for 32-bit, so it's not that big of a deal that I lost it for here. And I've learned to get used to not having those old plugins around. But there might be someone out there that really built their workflow around some of their old software and old plugins. And I'm going to tell you, if you are upgrading to this machine or a new Mac machine, that just remember, whatever's 32-bit is going to be lost. I can't go down the list and tell you what they are, but you'll know right away when you do a time machine restore and transfer all the contents of the old computer onto the new computer. But if you need a machine that supports the old 32-bit plugins and software, I recommend just getting a high-powered older Mac if you are on Mac, rather than buying a brand new machine. That way you have your legacy software and legacy plugins always there for you. If your mind is set to get a new machine, there will be some adapting that you're going to have to do. So just be prepared for that. Now, just for fun, I ran some Geekbench and Cinebench scores on this Mac, and I did some from my old Mac, which isn't really a fair comparison. We're comparing i7 quad-core to an i9 8-core. But I ran a scan before I did the time machine restore of applying my old computer into this machine, and I did a scan afterwards. So let's just pull this up. So the way I did this was I ran Cinebench and ran Geekbench before I did the time machine restore and brought my old computer into this one. Then once I did the time machine restore and transferred all my data into this computer, I ran it again. My expectation was that I would get a lower score once I had all my background programs running, but that wasn't actually the case. So let's check this out. So before time machine, my Cinebench score was 3282. After time machine, it was 3344, just slightly higher within the margin of error. But I think the reason why I got a better score after I did the time machine restore onto the Mac, the data transfer, was that I was a little bit more aware of making sure my thermals were down when I started the scan, while the first time I did it when it was clean, I kind of just did it right away. But what this is telling me is, the way I'm interpreting it, is they're scoring about the same. Now, just compared to the 15-inch MacBook where I'm coming from, the Cinebench was 1420, 3344 compared to 1420. It's over double the score of the previous computer. Now let's look at the Geekbench readings. So for single core, the Geekbench score is 1121 and multi-core is 6993. After the data transfer, it's 1236 for single core, 7080 for multi-core. And compared to the 15-inch, 825 for single core and 3321 for multi-core. Now for OpenCL scores, 39117 before time machine, 39441 after time machine. Compared to the old 15-inch MacBook Pro, it was 1705. So yeah, huge power difference, huge difference in graphic processing. In practical terms, whatever takes 5 minutes to render takes 3 minutes to render. Whatever takes 5 hours to render takes 3 hours to render. Now let's talk about the battery life. Now I didn't actually test how long the battery is, but it is noticeably longer than my 2013 Retina Display MacBook Pro. And it's not one of those ones where, oh, it's a long battery. if you're not doing much on it. And mind you, sometimes I'll be editing for about an hour to an hour and a half before I see it dip down from 100% to 30%. with enough juice left over to actually render whatever I'm editing. For having an Intel chip in there, I'm really impressed with the battery life. In fact, I added a utility to my computer to limit the battery to only 75%. Now, it only works when you have it on, because as soon as you shut down the computer, it'll charge it back up to 100%. But the reason why I do that is to keep the battery health in order. And sometimes when you keep it at 100% for too long and you're always plugging in and you're not letting it move around, it doesn't prolong the health of the lithium battery that's in it. From what I read, keeping your battery between 50 and 80% is actually the best way to lengthen its life. So if you got any questions or comments about my custom ordered 16-inch MacBook Pro, please leave them in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts, answer any questions, or learn anything new that I have not covered in this video today. If you like this video, please smash that like button. And if it's your first time here and you found this video useful, please click that subscribe button, and don't forget to click that little bell icon so you get a notification the next time I upload a video. Don't forget to add me on Instagram, where I share content that I don't always share here on YouTube, or where I do sneak peeks of upcoming videos. All right, thank you for watching. Take care and stay healthy.